Okay, this is the tutorial for the 3D printed fidget spinner. First, I'm going to go to create and make a new document, and we'll call this one fidget spinner. You should be fairly familiar with this workspace at this point. I'm just going to turn off these two planes to make it a little bit easier to navigate around without the other planes visible. And let's go ahead and start a sketch on this plane. Then I'm going to turn the camera so I'm looking right down on it. And first I want to make our hole, our space, for our center point bearing. To do that, we are going to go up here to this center point circle, and let's click on this little point here and make our circle. Don't worry about the size yet. We're going to set that next. So I just wanted to point out that because I have this circle anchored to this center point, I can't move it around, but I can still adjust the size, the diameter of the circle, but I can't really adjust the center point here. It's locked in, and you can tell that it's locked in because it's black instead of blue. If it's blue, you can still move it around, and we'll go into tangents in a little while. But I just wanted to point that concept out of if it's black, it's locked in. Blue, you can still move it around. So the next step we need to do is set the proper diameter for our hole that our bearing is going to go into. The ones that I have bought are 0.87 inches. So we need to set the dimension by clicking on this dimension button and then click on the edge. And let's move this out a little bit. We want this to be 0.87 exactly. We want to be able to fit the bearing right in here. This is going to be the center point, okay? Now, a fidget spinner has a couple of other holes available, and we can put counterweights in there, or we can put other bearings. I just bought a bunch of bearings, so we'll be making, we'll just be putting bearings on the different arms as well. And I should mention that this fidget spinner is going to have 3 arms, but if you would like, you're welcome to just have 2 arms or even just 1 arm, okay? That's up to you. But the first thing I want to do is make another circle, so I click here on the circle. And do you see when I line it up with the center point of my first circle, it makes this like dotted line? Okay, so I want to make sure it's right above it. And it doesn't matter how far above it is, we're going to set that next. Just anywhere where it's right above it and you make another hole. So again, we want this one to be 0.87 because we're just going to be putting another ball bearing in there. And this is where you determine how long you want your arms to be. So we've set the dimension on the diameter of circles. We've done it before on other shapes like our 3D cube. Here you can set the dimension of pretty much anything. So you could do it in between these two or in between the center point of the circles. So let's do that. I'll select this and select this, and you can see that we can set the distance, the dimension between those two center points, and this all determines how long your arms are going to be. I would recommend doing something maybe around between like 1 inch if you want it to be the shortest possible, maybe like 1.5 if you want it to be longer. But you want to be able to make the fidget spinner arms pass between your thumb and your middle finger or your index finger, whatever you use to hold the fidget spinner. So I'm going to cut down right down the middle and do 1.25 inches. That's probably a good distance for like a good average sized hand. If you're a little smaller, maybe you want to consider doing it down to like 1.1 or maybe like 1.15, something around that vicinity, okay? Next, we need to make the area around our bearing because right now this is a hole, but it doesn't have anything to secure it in. So we need to make a second circle outside of this one, like this. We want it to be slightly larger than this one, and this is where we're going to fit the ball bearing in here, and this is going to be the plastic that surrounds it. So once you have made that second circle, I just want to point out that these two circles are now black, and it's because we set the dimension, the distance between these two. So these are all locked into place. I can't adjust this circle or this circle, but this circle I can because it's still blue. So we're going to set the dimension of this outer circle, and it will get locked in too with black. So if we set the dimension between where our bearing is going to go and the outer plastic, this is how thick it is. I would recommend doing it pretty, let's say the thicker it is, the less likely it is to break under the pressure of holding the bearing. Something along the lines of 0.125 around there. You could make it thicker if you want. I wouldn't go any skinnier than that though, because I've seen it happen before where you hammer in the bearing in this circle here and it cracks this outer perimeter. So you don't want that to happen. Okay, so we've got our top arm and we have our center hole, but you may be asking, what about the other two arms? So we're going to be using a tool called a circular pattern, and by default, up here on the top toolbar, it's kind of hard to find. You'll see these 4 squares right here called a linear pattern. If you click on the drop-down menu next to it, you'll see the circular pattern, and you can already tell from the icon that that's what we want. So if you click on the circular pattern and then select the circle here and the outer circle here, it automatically assumes that we want to make 3, and it can already automatically pinpoint this center axis point, and we can confirm that. Or let's say if you wanted maybe like just 2 arms, we double click on that and change it to 2, and you can see that we have 2 arms there. If you wanted, I guess you could do 1 here, but what would be the point because you already had that set? So 3. If you wanted to, if you could provide your own bearings, then you could go up to 5 even, but I'm only going to provide you 3 bearings, 1 for the center and 2 for the side. So the other 2 would be up to you to provide. We'll just do 3 for now. And do you see on our mouse icon, you see a picture of a mouse with a green check mark on the left click? That just means left click to confirm that choice. So now that we've created our circular pattern here, we have our 2 other spots for our bearing. We need to make a bridge to connect all 3 of these arms together. And to do that, we're just going to be using the 3-point arc. Some of you may have already used this tool before, so you're fairly familiar with it at this point. So we'll click on the 3-point arc, and we're just going to create these bridges here and kind of make this look like an actual fidget spinner. It's starting to come together here now. Okay, and you can see that these are blue still. We can still adjust the movement of them if we want to. Let's go ahead and set the dimension between our center point and these arms so they're all equal distance. So if I click on this center point for our center bearing and this arc right here, you can see right now the distance is 0.218257 inches. If we change it to something like 3, that's going to adjust that. And don't worry if these got moved, we'll set them later. Now, if you wanted it to be fatter, you could potentially do something like 0.4 or 0.5, and that'll start moving this, but we'll set these other 2 too, so it'll be symmetrical. I'm going to do something a little skinnier, maybe like a 0.2. That's probably the least amount of how skinny you'd probably want it to be. But if maybe like 0.2 to 0.4 is what I would recommend between this distance here. So we'll click on dimension, then we'll do it on these other 2, make that 0.2, and make this one 0.2. So now that it looks symmetrical, we can still move things around, and you can see that our arcs look a little bit off, a little bit wonky, right? So we need to set what's called a tangent, and a tangent is locking these arms in place where we want them to be. And if you look up at the top, you'll be able to see all these different constraints. If you're using a smaller screen, this might be a drop-down menu. So you're going to click on the drop-down menu and look for whatever is called a tangent. So it'll be this circle with a diagonal line going over the top. So now we're just going to equalize the angle and the distance of all the arms by using our tangent here. So we're going to click on that, click on our arc, click on that, and you can see that it's kind of centered in the middle of this arc here. Then we'll just do it on this other side. So click on the arc, and then click on this outer perimeter, and it's straightened it out here. We're gonna do it for all of 3 of these arcs. So we'll click on this arc, then click on the outer circle, and click on the arc, and click on this outer circle, and you can see that the angle and where these are locked in is now all the same. So click on this arc, and click on there, click on our arc, and click on there. So now my fidget spinner is symmetrical, and it should spin without any distance being unequal. Okay, so now that we have our symmetrical fidget spinner, we want to extrude it, but we want to do it the distance of the bearing itself. However high the bearing is, we want it to be able to fit perfectly in these 4 holes. So when we click on our extrude button, it should automatically assume that what spots we want to extrude. And by default, it extrudes at 1 inch. We're going to extrude it exactly 0.28 inches. And that should be exactly the size. All three of these circles are exactly the size that we want our bearings to fit in. Okay. Hopefully yours is starting to look like a fidget spinner. Right now the edges are looking pretty sharp, and we don't want it to accidentally bump up into the inside of your hand. I believe it's called a waddle. We don't want it to cut up your waddle. So we're going to be using what's called a fillet, and all of you should be fairly familiar with the fillet if you've done the 3D cube assignment. So when you click on the fillet, you don't want to select this whole face, because it's going to round off our inner circle. So if we were to just fillet that whole face, do you see how the inner circles have been rounded off now? And now our bearings won't fit nice and tight inside each one of those. So we need to select only the outer ring when we do a fillet. So click on fillet, and let's click on our outer ring. And you can see before, I got an error, and it's because I had this fillet set at too big of a distance that it breaks the geometry. Do you see this red here? That means that the geometry is the radius is too high, so it can't solve that geometry. So you need to lower the radius to something maybe like 0.1. Could we get away with 0.2? So I think 0.2 might not work. We could try 0.1 and see if that is any better, if that does work. Yeah, so maybe just stick to 0.1 or slightly less if you want the edges to be sharper. But I would do a fillet around the radius of 0.1, and this is really starting to look like a fidget spinner. Okay. And last thing I would recommend doing, because most of your fidget spinners are going to look fairly similar. Like some of your arms might be thicker if you decide to go that way. Some of you might have less arms, but most of them are going to look around like this shape, especially if you're following along exactly what I'm doing. We're going to get a lot of fidget spinners that look like this. So I would recommend just etching in a little symbol on each arm, so then you can easily see which fidget spinner is yours. So let's click on sketch, click on the face of our fidget spinner, and you could do like any kind of shape that you want. I'll just do like couple little triangles like on each side, each arm, so then I can see that this is my fidget spinner. Now, if you're truly concerned and you want every single arm to be symmetrical, you could do like potentially an already like made shape, like a square, and then just make sure that the square is the right dimension using the dimension button, okay? Really small little symbols like this aren't going to make that much difference in terms of weight for your arms. It should spin just fine. So once I've made my sketches, I'll just click on the extrude button, and instead of add, I'm just going to click on remove. So your fidget spinner could have like 3 holes cut into it, but let's say even if you were concerned about the weight distribution between each arm, you could even do like something really skinny, like 0.02. So it's just barely on there. It's just barely scratched in. That's really not going to make much of a difference in terms of weight distribution. But the main reason we are making these symbols is I just wanted you to be able to easily identify your fidget spinner. It's basically like writing your name on your paper so nobody else steals it, okay? Then we just go ahead and export this and turn it in just like I've shown you in the past. So we would right click on our part 1 and go to export. Now, if your format is not STL, it might be Parasolid, you're going to go down to STL, and you want your units, it may by default be on meters, you want to set that to millimeters. And then for your file name, we're just going to do first name, last name, spinner, or something along those lines, okay? Then I'll hit export. And if you're using one of my laptops, then you will see your file downloaded right here. You're good to open up the Canvas assignment fidget spinner, click and drag that onto the rocket ship. If you are using your Chromebook, just click on that rocket ship and find your STL file. By default, I believe it saves on your Google Drive folder. So you just got to find your file and submit it. Just make sure that it's an STL. And in the comments, you're going to click on add comment and tell me which color you want your fidget spinner to be out of the ones that I have listed on the whiteboard. Again, as always, if you have any questions about this assignment, feel free to email me or come up and talk to me in person, and I would love to help you out.